You think you're addicted to your phone, to TikTok, to YouTube shorts, to the endless scroll. But Jung would say otherwise. He would whisper that what grips you isn't the glowing screen, but the phantom self that screen reflects back at you. This isn't entertainment. This is identity maintenance. Every flick of your thumb is a ritual, keeping alive a version of you that never truly existed. A self stitched together from comparisons, projections, masks. Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The scroll is not your fate. It is your unconscious in motion. You aren't consuming videos. You're consuming fragments of who you wish to be, who you fear to be, who you pretend to be, and each clip feeds the shadow you refuse to face. Consider this. Jung once treated a man who seemed tormented by his compulsive need to seek stimulation, not because he loved news or novelty, but because silence threatened to reveal the emptiness at his core. That is you now. You scroll not to find meaning, but to avoid the dread of sitting face to face with yourself. You see the lives of others and imagine possibility. You sense the gap between your inner chaos and their curated clarity. You feel the gnawing hunger of comparison that never stops, because it was never about them. It was always about the unreconciled fragments inside you. Jung warned that when the mask, the persona, takes control, we lose our authenticity and begin to live for appearances. Social feeds aren't neutral tools. They are vast performance theaters, demanding you to polish your mask, edit your desires, and starve your soul. You think you're entertained. You are, in truth, entrained, trained to worship an image of yourself that never existed. So the paradox is clear. You aren't hooked on scrolling. You're hooked on maintaining a ghost. A ghost self built from projection, comparison, and fear. And here is the most dangerous discovery. The more you feed that ghost, the more your real self withers. That is why hours pass and you emerge not refreshed, but hollow, because you were nourishing an illusion while starving your soul. Let me tell you a story Jung himself might have recorded, though I'll give it to you in plain language, stripped of the dust of archives. A man came to him, successful, respected, admired. On the surface, he carried no pathology, no madness. He was what society celebrates, efficient, charming, endlessly productive. But at night, when his family had gone to bed, he stayed up alone, unable to stop pacing the hallways of his own mind. His compulsion wasn't whiskey or gambling. It was reflection in mirrors, not literal glass, but the human kind. Every social interaction, every colleague's compliment, every passing judgment from strangers, he collected as proof that he existed. When Jung pressed him, the man admitted something chilling. If others stopped seeing me, I would disappear. He had built an identity entirely on borrowed eyes, on reflections from the crowd. This, Jung realized, was a living allegory of the modern person, what you enact every time you scroll. You are not hunting for cat videos or political updates. You are, like this man, searching for your reflection in others' curated personas. Jung wrote that the danger of modern life was not raw instinct, but identification with the mask. Once you confuse who you are with the image you present, you will sell your soul to keep that image intact. The man Jung studied collapsed not because he was weak, but because he was too strong at playing the game of appearances. His mask worked so well that he forgot he had a face underneath. Eventually, the mask demanded so much psychic energy that he broke, his nights filled with dread, his days drained of meaning. Is this not your condition when you leave the feed after hours, feeling strangely invisible? The scrolling is your nightly pacing. The curated faces are the mirrors, and your real self, silenced beneath the performance, begins to suffocate. This was not laziness. This was hypnosis. The hypnosis of the persona, amplified 1,000-fold by technology. Before we can dismantle the trap of endless scrolling, we must name its architecture. Jung insisted that language matters, because without words for what is happening inside you, you remain enslaved to it. So let us define the 4 pillars of this psychic machinery. The shadow. This is not merely your darkness, it is everything you have refused to claim as yourself. Not just rage, envy, and lust, but also brilliance, ambition, and power that frightened you. The shadow is your unlived life. Online, the shadow comes alive in comparison. You see in others the confidence, beauty, or discipline you exiled from yourself. What you cannot admit in you, you project onto them. Thus, the feed becomes your unconscious gallery. The persona, the mask. Jung wrote that the persona is a compromise between individual and society. It is how you survive the collective. But when the mask becomes the only face you no longer live, you perform. Social media accelerates this collapse. Your posts are not expressions, but auditions, rehearsals for a role that wins applause but costs authenticity. Every selfie, every caption, every choreographed authenticity is another brick in the wall between you and your own soul. The complex. Jung saw that the psyche was not one unified being, but a parliament of sub-personalities, each charged with its own energy. A complex is an autonomous knot, built from childhood wounds, reinforced by repeated experiences that hijacks your perception. When you scroll, it is not you choosing. It is the inferiority complex comparing, the abandonment complex seeking reassurance, the perfectionism complex scanning for rivals. Because complexes behave like little egos, they seize control. Therefore, what you call habit is often possession. Inflation and deflation. Here lies the secret rhythm of the feed. Inflation is the fleeting high, a like, a view count, a sense of being seen. Deflation is the crash, the awareness that it was never enough. Jung called inflation identification with an archetype, feeling larger than life, divine for a moment. But every inflation carries its own deflation, the collapse back into worthlessness. The scroll is engineered to keep you bouncing between these poles, never resting in authenticity. So we see the machinery: shadow projected outward, persona performed upward, complex hijacking inward, inflation, deflation, cycling endlessly. Because this mechanism runs unconsciously, therefore you call it entertainment. In truth, it is psychological programming. And here is the paradox. The more you feed this system, the more alien you become to yourself. You trade your inner life for borrowed images. You scroll not to discover, but to forget. Forget the shadow. Forget the buried face behind the mask. Forget the silence where your true voice waits. They see the highlight reel and feel their own life flatten into grayscale monotony. They sense the hollow echo after each burst of scrolling, as if their psyche has been siphoned, leaving them strangely weightless yet unbearably heavy. They feel the sting of envy not as hatred but as hunger, an ache for the parts of themselves they once disowned and now only witness in others. They see time vanish, hours devoured, and yet feel no satisfaction, only a lingering shame that resists naming. They sense the invisible audience perched on their shoulders, judging, watching, demanding, even in solitude, because once the persona dominates, you never walk alone. This is the texture of the comparison plague, not mere distraction, but a psychic corrosion. Jung wrote that what is repressed does not disappear. It returns in distorted forms. When you deny your own shadow, you chase it in others' feeds. When you starve your authentic desires, you binge on substitutes. Because your psyche will not be silenced, therefore it screams through envy, fatigue, and emptiness. The feed is not neutral. It is a mirror, but a distorted one, reflecting only the masks of others, never their shadows, never their hidden wounds. And so you compare your insides to their outsides, a battle you're designed to lose. This is why you close the app and feel hollow. Not because you saw too much, but because you failed to see the one thing that matters: yourself. Now that you've felt the texture of the comparison plague, we must name its 4 snares. Jung taught that consciousness begins by differentiating patterns. To name a trap is to weaken it. Trap 1, the persona loop. Here the mask feeds on applause. You post, you perform, you optimize. The algorithm rewards the polished version of you, and so you keep polishing until nothing remains beneath. Because the mask wins, therefore, the soul retreats. This loop feels like validation, but functions like exile. Each like banishes you further from the raw self. Trap 2, the ideal self mirage. This is the endless chase for the future you, the fitter, richer, freer self who always lives just beyond the horizon. Jung warned that inflation makes us believe we are already fused with the archetype, the hero, the saint, the visionary. But the mirage dissolves as soon as you approach. Because you are chasing projection, therefore your present self is condemned as insufficient. Trap 3, the proxy rivalry. Here you measure your worth against strangers' curated lives. A colleague's vacation becomes proof you are stagnant. A stranger's body becomes proof you are unworthy. Jung observed that shadow projection always disguises itself as moral outrage or envy. You are not enraged at them, you are starving for the unlived parts of you they represent. Because you cannot admit this hunger, therefore you battle phantoms online. Trap 4, the shame-reward cycle. This is the cruelest snare. A brief dopamine high, followed by shame for wasting time. Then another scroll to escape the shame itself. Jung wrote that the unconscious creates compulsions to balance what consciousness cannot integrate. Here, the compulsion is not to learn or to connect. It is to avoid the unbearable feeling of being nothing. Because the cycle briefly numbs you, therefore you keep repeating it, confusing anesthesia for nourishment. Together these 4 traps form the cage, the loop of persona, the mirage of ideal self, the rivalry of shadows, the cycle of shame. They are not random, they are archetypal. Which means they do not simply distract you, they drain you at the root, siphoning your psychic energy into illusions. And the paradox, the more you feed these traps, the more convinced you become that freedom lies just one scroll further. You may think these traps are random temptations, but Jung would insist, nothing in the psyche is random. Every compulsion follows a law. Let us trace the mechanism. Cause into effect, step into consequence. Because algorithms are designed to amplify emotional intensity, your amygdala flags the feed as urgent. Therefore, your nervous system responds as though survival were at stake. You aren't scrolling for fun. You are scrolling as if your life depends on it. Because the persona is rewarded with applause, likes, follows, recognition, your psyche equates performance with safety. Therefore, your shadow, the unlived and unpolished parts of you, is suppressed even further. Each like is not affirmation, but a tiny burial of what you refuse to show. Because complexes are autonomous, they seize control at the first spark of comparison. The inferiority complex whispers, "You're behind." The abandonment complex hisses, "You're forgotten." Therefore the scroll continues, not by choice, but by possession. Because inflation offers a rush of transcendence, I could be like them. It collapses inevitably into deflation. I am nothing by comparison. Therefore the cycle repeats, sustaining itself by alternating between false divinity and crushing worthlessness. Do you see the inevitability? These mechanisms are not accidents. They are inevitabilities built on psychic law. The trap works because it hijacks archetypal energies that are older than you, older than the internet, older than civilization itself. Jung warned that when unconscious forces are not integrated, they rule us with iron necessity. You think you are browsing freely. In truth, you are being browsed, scanned, sorted, consumed by your own shadow, your own unclaimed fragments. And here lies the critical insight. Because you do not see the mechanism, therefore you cannot stop it. Awareness is the first fracture in the chain. Awareness alone is not enough. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To break the comparison plague, you must act, not once, but rhythmically. Rituals, not resolutions." Let us walk through 7, each one stacked upon the last, designed to reclaim your psychic sovereignty. Ritual 1. The feed fast, 72 hours, contained. Begin with absence. For 3 days, no social feeds, messages and calls allowed, but no scrolling. In the silence, journal daily with a single prompt, "What am I envious of today?" Jung taught that envy is a compass pointing toward your unlived life. Because envy reveals shadowed desire, therefore the fast is not deprivation, but diagnosis. Ritual 2. The Persona Audit. Write down the top 5 traits you emphasize in your online mask. Then write 5 you conceal. Now choose one concealed trait, perhaps your anger, your ambition, or your tenderness, and commit to expressing it offline this week. Jung warned that when the persona dominates, the soul suffocates. Because you reveal one hidden trait, therefore the mask begins to loosen. Ritual 3. The Signal Diet. Unfollow 80% of accounts that fuel comparison. Replace them with creators who reveal process, not product. Why? Because process humanizes achievement. Jung wrote that the psyche heals when we see wholeness rather than perfection. Because you surround yourself with process, therefore envy becomes instruction instead of poison. Ritual 4. The Creation Hour. Each morning, before consuming anything, create something. Write 200 words. Sketch. Practice your craft. Jung called this active imagination, the dialogue with the unconscious through images and acts. Because output precedes input, therefore you anchor your identity in agency, not audience. Ritual 5. The Micro-Exposure. Once a week, share something authentic without optimization, no filters, no strategy. Speak of a shadow trait with compassion. I am impatient. I am afraid. Jung observed that shadow integration dissolves shame. Because you expose yourself consciously, therefore no critic can blackmail you with what you've already owned. Ritual 6. The Rivalry Transmutation. Identify your top comparison target. Write. What unlived quality in me do they represent? Then design a 30-day practice to develop that quality in yourself. Jung called this individuation, becoming whole by reclaiming projections. Because you reclaim envy as a map, therefore comparison becomes evolution. Ritual 7. The Sabbath of Silence. 1 day each week, no feeds, no posts. Instead, walk long, read deeply, speak with one trusted person. Mark the day with a simple ceremony. Light a candle, pour tea, open a sacred text. Jung insisted that ritual is the vessel of transformation. Because you replace algorithm with rhythm, therefore your psyche regains sovereignty. These 7 rituals are not gimmicks. They are scaffolding. Each is a reversal of the mechanism. Fasting breaks the loop. Audit weakens the mask. Diet repairs perception. Creation restores agency. Exposure integrates shadow. Transmutation redeems envy. Sabbath reclaims rhythm. Do them not as rules, but as rites. Because once repeated, they cease being discipline and become identity. And once they become identity, you will no longer scroll to forget. You will live to remember. Even sacred rituals can be corrupted by the very shadow they are meant to dissolve. Jung warned that the greatest danger is always the self that believes itself cured. Let us name the 4 common derailers so you may see them before they entrap you. Pitfall 1. All or nothing purity. You will be tempted to demand perfection, never scrolling again, never slipping. But Jung observed that inflation often disguises itself as moral superiority. To seek purity is to strengthen the persona. The remedy: aim for 80%, not 100%. A human rhythm, not a divine standard. Pitfall 2. Substitution addiction. When you fast from one feed, another may rise. News cycles, trading apps, Reddit holes, each becomes a surrogate drug. Jung described this as the compulsion to repeat, the psyche endlessly recreating the same pattern until consciousness interrupts it. The remedy: apply identical boundaries across all digital arenas. Pitfall 3. Performing authenticity. The mask is cunning. It may even disguise itself as truth. You post your vulnerability, your shadow, your tears, but secretly still optimize them for applause. Jung cautioned that the persona will always attempt to colonize new territory. The remedy: keep a private journal of truths never shared. Let some authenticity remain unmarketed. Pitfall 4. Invisible contracts. When you change, others may resist. Friends who expect instant replies, relatives who demand availability, colleagues who assume online presence as proof of worth. Jung noted that collective systems resist individuation, for the individuated person threatens the group illusion. The remedy: renegotiate expectations openly. Announce new rhythms, not as rebellion, but as necessity. Remember, these pitfalls are not failures. They are feedback, signs of where your shadow still waits to be integrated. Awareness plus correction is growth. Blindness plus repetition is possession. Rituals break the chains, but maintenance keeps them from reforging. Jung taught that individuation is never a single event. It is a continual alignment of the self with the depths. Without anchors, the tide of comparison returns. Here are 5 to root yourself daily, weekly, quarterly. Anchor 1. The Daily Envy Scan. Each evening ask, where did envy strike me today? Write one line. Jung insisted that envy is not sin, but signal, a revelation of shadowed desire. Naming it prevents unconscious projection. Anchor 2. The micro-action. For every envy recorded, take one small step the next day toward embodying that quality yourself. If you envy discipline, wake 5 minutes earlier. If beauty, care for your body. Because small actions metabolize shadow, therefore envy becomes energy. Anchor 3. Weekly creation session. Set aside one uninterrupted block. Write, paint, build, cook. Jung's own therapy was art, mandalas, visions, colors that gave form to the unconscious. Because you honor creation, therefore you remind the psyche it is a maker, not a mimic. Anchor 4. Quarterly. Pruning. Every 3 months, audit your follows and feeds. Remove any account that reseeds comparison. Jung noted that the psyche must prune illusions to allow reality to grow. This pruning is psychic gardening. Anchor 5. The contract of witness. Choose one trusted friend. Share your screen time stats monthly. Celebrate reductions, not reach. Jung believed the psyche thrives under conscious witness, another human holding you accountable to your own becoming. These anchors are not chores. They are psychological hygiene. Just as the body decays without washing, the soul decays without witnessing. Maintenance is the slow revolution that ensures liberation is not temporary, but woven into the fabric of daily life. History gives us mirrors, some fractured, some luminous. Jung often compared the living patient to archetypal patterns from myth and culture, reminding us that every individual drama repeats an ancient story. Let us take 2 figures, one who was devoured by persona and one who withdrew into silence to protect the self. The cautionary, the performer devoured by their own mask. Think of the celebrity whose entire existence became a stage, praised endlessly, yet hollow within. Their downfall was not vice, but over-identification. They lived so completely in the gaze of others that they forgot to ask who was watching from within. Jung warned that inflation with the persona is more dangerous than any addiction because it replaces the self with a mask. Such figures collapsed when applause faded, not because they lost talent, but because they had no face beneath the mask. This is the fate of those who scroll to maintain an image. They die the slow death of invisibility once the audience looks away. The exemplary, the creator who chose withdrawal. Contrast this with the artist or thinker who vanished for seasons, refusing the stage, abandoning the applause. They returned later, not diminished, but magnified. Their withdrawal was not weakness, but incubation. Jung admired such figures because they lived what he called individuation, stepping away from collective illusion to hear the deeper voice. They became luminous not by showing everything, but by cultivating the unseen. Their silence was strategy, their return, revelation. These two paths diverge like mythic roads, one toward the erosion of self in endless performance, the other toward the strengthening of self in chosen solitude. One devoured by comparison, the other deepened by incubation. Because history repeats itself in Psyche, therefore you must decide. Will you become the performer consumed or the creator renewed? Do not think this is merely about your screen time. Jung warned that the world hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. When millions surrender their attention to illusion, the collective unconscious shifts. The shadow grows heavier, unintegrated, flooding culture with envy, imitation, and despair. Because individuals outsource their worth to algorithms, therefore entire societies become fragile, driven not by authenticity, but by spectacle. Leaders rise not from wisdom, but from performance. Communities form not around truth, but around the loudest mask. The danger is not trivial distraction. The danger is cultural hypnosis. Yet, the opposite is also true. Because one individual withdraws attention from illusion, therefore, the collective gains a fragment of clarity. Jung saw individuation not as selfish isolation, but as medicine for the whole. A single person who reclaims their inner life becomes a counterweight against mass possession. Imagine a culture where more of us chose the Sabbath of Silence, the creation hour, the pruning of illusions. The collective atmosphere itself would shift from restless comparison to steady presence, from mimicry to originality, from envy to integration. The stakes, then, are not simply your peace of mind. They are whether we as a culture become a hive of masks or a network of individuated souls. We began with a paradox. You are not addicted to scrolling. You are addicted to a self that doesn't exist. Now you see the mechanism: shadow projected, persona performed, complexes hijacking, inflation collapsing. You have named the traps, traced the causes, practiced the rituals, braced against the pitfalls, and anchored yourself with maintenance. The danger was never that you looked at too many screens. The danger was that you forgot to look into yourself. The feed cannot destroy you. Only neglect of your own depths can. But here is the hope. Because you can see the machinery, therefore you can refuse its possession. Because you can ritualize your attention, therefore you can reclaim it as sacred energy. Because you can individuate, therefore you can offer not just your own healing, but medicine to a culture starving for authenticity. So the call is clear. Identify your primary trap. Is it the persona loop, the ideal self-mirage, the proxy rivalry, the shame-reward cycle? Name it. Comment it. Begin with Ritual 1 tonight. Fast from the feed for 72 hours and let envy reveal your unlived life. And remember Jung's warning and his promise. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The danger isn't that you see too much. The danger is failing to build a conscious relationship with that vision. Use it as cultural medicine. Become what comes next.